So we're going to talk about education, and I've been wondering if this is a jobs crisis we have right now or an education crisis we have right now. I was looking this morning at the BLS statistics, and we all know there's that 9%, 9.1% unemployment rate. But if you don't have a high school degree, there's a 14.7% unemployment rate. And if you factor in the number of people without high school degrees who are out of the workforce, who are discouraged workers, 62% of Americans without a high school degree are not working. But as you move up the education ladder, things get much better. High school degree, you're at 9.5%. More than half, but only just, are working. If you have some college, you're at 8%, and you're now at 2/3 of people with some college working. And once you get into the BA world, people, probably most people here, once you have a BA, it's a 4.5% unemployment rate, with 3/4 of those people working. That means, you know, that's basically a fully functioning economy for people with BAs. People with PhDs, it's 1.9% unemployment. I mean, I was taught that that's theoretically impossible. You can't have unemployment that low. So what seems to be the challenge for America, both in this cyclical crisis, but also in the structural crisis that I think most people believe underlies this recession, is maybe it's not so much how do we get more people working, it's how do we get people who don't have a high school degree to have a high school degree, and how do we get people with a high school degree to get some college or get a BA. And so we're going to have a variety of perspectives on that. We'll start at the end with Stephanie Burns, chairman of Dow Corning. Stephanie describes herself, if I may say, as an uber geek who started in the labs, and I think you yourself are sort of shocked to discover that you really like management. You really like running things and not just working in the lab, although you told me you do miss that too. And you explained to me on the phone the other day, and I thought it would be helpful to frame this, how Dow Corning and how American manufacturing has changed over the last couple decades, and explains why there's so little demand for lower educated workers.
Well, there's a tremendous amount of demand on our part for people who have the proper training and capability in our manufacturing sector. Manufacturing has changed quite a bit over the last 20 or 30 years, and what an operator in a facility in our plant needs today is very different what they needed long ago in terms of skills. They are making critical decisions on the job, very computer-enabled feedback from our operations, and the required training for this is significant. And in fact, we more often than not look for operators who have extended education beyond high school. And what we have found most useful in this is to partner with community colleges and establish training programs, immersion training programs for people going into our trades. This includes building a solar application lab in Tennessee, so people coming out of the school system can go into this facility and train on site. And it also includes partnership with veterans coming back who are in extreme need of retraining and jobs. So it's been a very successful thing. We have found partnering at the local level to be the most effective in terms of bringing manufacturing jobs to our company.
And the reason manufacturing is so crucial is when you have education and you leave manufacturing for services, you tend to get a bump up in salary. But when you don't have education and you leave manufacturing for services, your income falls dramatically. And so I'm in the manufacturing stream, and that's the obsession there. We'll now go to Professor James Heckman from hometown University of Chicago. He won the Nobel Prize for his work studying, it's the hardest thing in economics to study. How do you know when two things happen that one might have caused the other? And he used complex mathematical tools, various rigorous tests to piece that apart. And you've been applying that to education tremendously. So what what actually works? What causes people to get more education? What have you learned?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't describe myself as doing just complex work. I mean, a lot of it is just collecting basic facts and getting the facts straight and using even simple methods, experiments and the like. But what causes people to work? It's skills. It's exactly the kind of skills that were just described that are really extremely important. Skills that include the ability to understand what's written in front of you, but also social skills, the ability to stay on task, the ability to work with others, the ability, what is sometimes called soft skills, are extremely important and usually neglected in a lot of discussions. So I would say that when we talk about skills, we want to talk about not only the usual skills that are captured by test scores and no child left behind kind of inventories, but the soft skills. You know, Woody Allen made this great line years ago, which I think is actually quite accurate, that 80% of success is showing up. And that's really true, that really people staying with task, working with others, learning to control their anger, learning to finish and to stay focused and to stay socially engaged are the people who are most productive, even more so now than in the past.
And some of your work, which I think some people find discouraging, I actually find encouraging, is that the interventions that seem to make the biggest difference are when you're really, really young. Can you talk about that?
No, absolutely. And in fact, I would urge the group here today to think more broadly, to think globally. This is a global initiative, so I'd ask you to be global over the whole life cycle. The gaps that we see in children who are emerging from high school, many of those gaps in test scores and other measurements are present when they enter school. I mean, enter the first grade. And so we really have to think more broadly about how skills are formed than just worrying about the school systems or worrying about particular institutions. All of the institutions make a difference, so I'm not saying anything. But as a school system director, I'm sure you would agree with me that schools can only work with what parents are sending them and what families and institutions are sending them. And to really think about forming school skills, we really need to sort of think globally. We need to think about the American family. We need to think about the structures that produce kids 3, 4, and 5 who already come in some cases with great advantage, in other cases great disadvantage. And it's very hard to change those gaps. I mean, most of the evidence suggests that the gaps that are there at 6 are there at 18. And there's a lot going on before kids even enter school. So that's why I would really encourage us to think more broadly.
Great. So, Kaya, that's a perfect place to bring you in. Kaya Henderson is the commissioner of the Washington, D.C. Public Schools. Many of you may know that her predecessor and her previous boss, Michelle Rhee, has become really a lightning rod for this big debate about school reform. But here's a secret. Kaya was the one who did much of the stuff that made Michelle Rhee a lightning rod. It's just Kaya's really, really nice. And so she didn't, and Michelle's lovely, but she's a little more, willing to get into big fights. So Kaya, I can't imagine you disagree with Professor Heckman, but what can you do, what can a school system do to get those 6-year-olds coming into your system with real social deficits and make sure at 18 they don't still have those same deficits?
So I think that in addition to trying to address the needs that present themselves in the early childhood stage, we have not been able to eliminate those gaps because we are doing school the same way we've done it for 100 years. We don't manufacture the way we did 20 years ago or 30 years ago. We don't bank. We don't buy shoes the way we did 20 years ago. But we educate children in the exact same way. And so I think part of the reason why we have not been able to close these achievement gaps is because we haven't thought about doing anything differently. When you look at what it is that Stephanie needs is people who can engage in technology to problem solve, people who can work in teams. We don't teach our children how to work in teams. We put one teacher standing standing in front of the classroom and have them impart knowledge to children instead of trying to unleash children's potential. We don't use technology in the classroom. Our children are plugged in all day long, and we ask them to come into school and unplug, to write with pencil and paper, to not engage in technology in generative and creative ways, and that's why our kids then can't meet the demand for what Stephanie and the other employers are looking for. And so I would suggest that we have to think about completely redoing school.
Man, that was kind of depressing, although also encouraging, just like Professor Heckman's work. And we're going to get at what this group of people can do to help you achieve that. We'll now move to Roger Ferguson. He's now the president of TIAA-CREF, where many of those teachers have their retirement. He was the #2 guy at the Fed for many years under Alan Greenspan. He was widely seen as the other candidate when Ben Bernanke was named. So do you thank God every day you didn't get that job, or is it just when there's big news? But
you have a question.
I wanted to bring you in because you were telling me that in your view, we really should not be creating a bunch of computer and math-loving automatons, that there's a richness to American education that we can't lose sight of.
Right. I will not answer your first question because I think the answer is obvious, but I will go to the second. First, let's be quite clear. We all understand that we have a real deficit in STEM education in the U.S., and so I really am supportive of some of the things that have been said and commitments made here. However, as I've talked to CEOs who are in STEM-related activities, CEOs of companies that hire huge numbers of engineers, the other point that they've made is don't forget the other kinds of disciplines that one learns. And Professor Heckman touched on some of this, and those things come through humanities, social sciences, a variety of disciplines. First, our kids are going to be growing up in a global world, so language skills are very important. Empathy for people who are different is very important. Understanding how to communicate well is incredibly important. So those skills all emerge, as Professor Heckman and others have pointed out, throughout life, but certainly in the higher education sphere. The second point I'd like to make is I strongly agree with the point that the superintendent made, and I should announce here I'm a proud product of the DC public schools. But it's important for us to really start to rethink what education is all about at many different levels. One of the things that we've seen is far too many K-12 kids are not prepared for higher education. And so some of the data show that as many as 40% of all students entering post-secondary education require some sort of remedial courses. And the folks who require remedial courses are far less likely to complete education, and therefore they fall into your camp, those who are underemployed and unemployed right now. So it's quite clear that we have to rethink that. We also have to rethink more broadly at higher education how we start to think about training for the jobs that Stephanie and many others are engaged in. So public-private partnerships are quite important in that space as well. And the third thing is we also have to recognize that we cannot ignore higher education beyond college, so the PhD programs, graduate schools. And then the final point I'd make, and then I'll move on, is we really have quite a difference across ethnic groups in all of these outcomes. And so while we can talk about things on average, in a society that's becoming much more diverse, we should all be anxious about the fact that people of color are falling way behind in many of these areas. So not only do we have a general societal problem, but we have a problem that's differentiated across diverse groups, just as we're becoming a much more diverse society.
Great. And now I want to bring Amy Rosen into the conversation. Amy had a fascinating career in transportation. For a while, she was on the board of Amtrak. And then she shifted over the last decade to education. She worked closely in the school system I went to, the New York public school system, running Joel Klein's efforts for reform there, probably along pretty similar lines to what Kaya has done. And now, Amy, you work with the, oh my God, National Foundation for Teaching Entrepreneurship.
Actually, the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship.
Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship. And your issue, your core issue at NFTE is that kids are just not engaged. I mean, a lot like what Kaya was saying. So talk a little about what you do, and is that a solution to find ways to make kids who otherwise might drop out find school more fun, more engaging?
Sure. So just echoing what some of my colleagues have said, that rediscovering really the way in which we educate kids in America in many different ways is critical, and particularly picking up on something you opened with, is this about jobs or is this about education? I would offer the notion that we need to educate ourselves into a better economy, and we need to force those conversations about jobs to actually talk about how we need to reposition and redesign our American schools if we want to build economic stability. So while there, I think, are great people out there, and Kaya is one of them, that are building school systems with accountability and trying to attract very different kinds of people into the teaching profession and doing many important things that we have to do. What occurred to me when I had an opportunity to spend a lot of time in urban schools, many of them failing schools, was that one of the key levers of change that we have to address is content. Content, both for the reasons that employers need and talk about, but also about relevancy. I mean, we have 50% of kids of color who are entering their high school class are not graduating with their high school class. More than half of them say that if school was connected or relevant to any possibilities in their life, they may have stayed there. So that being said, we have worked on a relatively simple intervention, but in one that I think is really critical. And if I could just, I can't even see the crowd out there, but if I could just ask a basic question and just put your hand up, how many people in the 12 years that you went to school before you graduated high school were ever offered a class that talked about entrepreneurial thought, business knowledge, or even personal finance?
I see one guy.
I can't see many, but I'm not sure I can see, but it's definitely under a dozen. So, that being said, I don't think there's any debate among anybody in this room that, small business has been the foundation of economic growth in America, and certainly, during the last 5 years, literally the U.S. companies in business for less than 5 years have been responsible for all net growth. Yet, as historically, it's almost taboo to talk in schools about money, to talk in schools about business, to talk in schools about personal finance. Lots of debate about whether you can teach entrepreneurial thought or not, and I would just say that in our experience at the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, commonly known as NIFTY if it's easier, we have found that with really good teacher training, a highly evolved experiential curriculum where we have worked with almost 400,000 kids, that in one course, you can actually not only teach sort of the basics of business and provide kids with the knowledge necessary to actually run a business, but actually open their kids' eyes to begin to think about success and what that looks like for them, so that when they get to the community colleges, first of all, they stay in school long enough to get there, and then can acquire the specific skills they need.
Right. Now, I prefer a panel where there's real disagreement because I think it's more enjoyable and entertaining, but the guy who thinks education is bad got stuck in traffic, so we don't have him here. But Professor Heckman, I'm turning to you to bring up some controversy. I don't know if this will work, but where are the interventions? I mean, we've heard about sort of post-high school, intervening after a high school graduate, get them some extra advanced training. We've heard about during high school, you've talked about preschool. Where, and I know you've done work on this, where's the bang for the buck? Where are the interventions that seem to pay off in a lifelong, or in lifelong earnings?
Well, let me sound a dissenting note. Just, you want to stir the pot, so I will. When we talk about education, we talk about skills. I want to repeat one point I made and then build on it, which was we see profound gaps in children at age 4, 5, and 6 that seem to persist throughout their whole educational experience and on into their adult lives. We then have to understand that when we think about education policy, we have to think about families. We have to think about how the family has important influence and how the family and family life is affecting the skills and opportunities of children. And I think we have to sort of broaden the discussion to really understanding that an education policy is a policy that supplements families, that helps families that are struggling. And I think we also, and this is a point that Roger was making, so I'll stir the pot even further about the racial gap. I think we have to understand that although there are profound racial gaps that should be addressed, that as Bill Wilson and many leading scholars have pointed out, African American scholars, that this whole issue about family life, which was frequently considered taboo in the discussion of race, is no longer taboo. And I think the reason is that the kind of issues that were so controversial, that were associated with blaming the victim and sort of stigmatizing the African American family, that family life is in trouble across all parts of American society. There may be different degrees, there may be to different extents, but whether we're talking about whites living in western Oklahoma, whether we're talking about inner city African American children, or we're talking about Hispanics living in the Valley in Texas, we're finding that family life plays a very important role. And any policy that actually is going to be successful in education is going to have to try to bring the family in to supplement the family and to recognize the realities of the American family. So that I'm not saying anything that contradicts the idea of improving beyond the stage, but even in schools, right? Parents that are cooperating, that are sort of supporting the children in the homework, are really making the child successful in school. So so stirring up two pots at once, and I'll be happy to take the heat.
And Amy asked to respond.
So, not easily intimidated, but to argue with a Nobel Prize winner on this is a little bit tough. But that being said, without a doubt, family environment are important in determining educational and skills. But I would argue that they're not the only determinant, and that we have to have really high expectations for all kids and not make any excuses. So, thank you. So, let me just give you from my, where I sit, two experiences. From a perspective of NIFTY, we have found NIFTY is by and large a late intervention because we work mostly in middle schools and high schools with kids, and it's not a systemic intervention. It's it lays in one classroom often. Yet we have found remarkable outcomes where we can take, and I'll take for Chicago, we run programs in all the Southside high schools in Chicago, for instance, and we had one young man named Rodney Walker who had been in 11 foster homes, 6 elementary schools. He didn't hit a NIFTY classroom with a NIFTY teacher in CPS until the first semester of his senior year. He was on the verge of dropping out. He was homeless. He had a D average. And this woman just opened his eyes and opened the possibilities by bringing business leaders, other people into his vision to be able to think differently about his life. And his story is he went on, he's the senior, he's president of Morehouse College, he's on the dean's list, he's interning with Arnie Duncan this summer. He's an extraordinary young man. And one can argue that he's an extraordinary young man and he's an exception. I would say that he is exceptional, but not an exception. That, we find that with the right interventions, with the right kids, and the second, just quickly example I'll use is I chair the board of the KIPP schools, which are a high-performing network of charter schools in Newark, New Jersey, and we often don't get those kids until 5th grade. We're trying to start earlier. And we find, without a doubt, looking for strategies to bring families into the equation is unbelievably helpful and often complicated, but really necessary. Yet where we don't have that luxury, we take hundreds and now thousands of kids and are graduating them in high school and they're going to college, and I think they have a pretty good chance of succeeding there.
Kaya was eager to jump in.
Sure, I want to pick up on that point because absolutely, if I have parental engagement, if I have kids who are well prepared by the time they're 3 or 4 or 5, that allows me to do my job in a very different way. But the truth of the matter is I don't, and I still have children who are showing up every day who I have to deliver for. when I think about our family engagement, I think part of the debate around school reform and are teachers the problem or are teachers the solution, and where does poverty come in, and is poverty an excuse, is it not an excuse? Really, it's a complicated set of factors that all work together. But school districts have kids for 8 hours a day between 4 walls. I can't change poverty. I can't force parental engagement. In fact, some of the reasons why our parents don't engage is because we failed them at the schoolhouse, or because they are hustling with 2 or 3 jobs and don't have time to help with homework, or they don't have money to buy books. And so whatever the circumstances in which I find my students, whether they have parental engagement or not, I have to deliver for them, and I can't allow that to be an excuse.
Let me let Stephanie jump in, then we'll get back to you.
I just want to talk about one program that we are involved with, and it's probably duplicated many, many times over in the country. And that's a program in Detroit called the DAPSEP program, which is a Detroit area pre-college preparation program for kids who are underprivileged and who are really not interested as they come into the program in especially the STEM. This is focused on STEM education. This program has expanded from focusing initially on high school age kids, getting them into college, to all the way down to kindergarten now. And they have a kindergarten and first grade program called Kinder Engineers. And that program, the waiting list for students to get into that program is huge. And one of the elements of it is they require a parent or guardian to come into the program with the child. And there's a waiting list for the parents to come in also. And I think we're going to find that if you take science and make it fun for the parents, that is going to influence the child. And I'm anxious to see how this goes. They're a couple years into it, but they are so oversubscribed. And this program, by the way, when you look at the outcome of the kids that are coming through this into the university system, is phenomenal. They've got about 4,000 kids a year that go through this program. They have Saturday STEM-focused education where companies like mine come in and teach classes. We teach a class from sand to silly putty because we're focused on silicon chemistry. And the students just love it. They spend their Saturdays in this program. 60% of the kids that come out of that program and apply to an engineering at University of Michigan are getting accepted. And their grade point average at Michigan is something like 3.4. So, you know, it's a fabulous story, and they're everywhere. And I think businesses can really engage, and the employees are motivated by this. And we also should not lose focus on the retirees. There are, you know, thousands of retirees coming into retirement who want a second career in doing something and giving back. And these are highly educated, highly trained people who I think we're underutilizing when we talk about our education challenge.
Great. Roger?
May I pick up on that last point? One, as you observe, I'm the president here of a huge retirement organization, and I fully buy into Stephanie's point that she just made, because I see it with my population. We are taking care of 3.7 million people. Many of them are going into retirement, and they're all looking to retire to something as opposed to retiring from something. But that then ties to a second point I would like to hear, I guess, your perspective from the DC public schools. My understanding is that the biggest statistic that reports on, or is, let's say, correlated, maybe not causes, success in terms of STEM education is the subject matter expertise of the teacher. And I think one of the big challenges that we have is simply not enough STEM teachers, not being paid enough, et cetera. Retirees may be part of the way to bridge that, but how do you think about that in the public schools, if I may steal the moderator's position?
Yeah. I mean, it's a significant challenge. It's a significant challenge. We just don't have as many mathematicians or people graduating with mathematic degrees. When you look at the employment incentives for people in STEM, they are paid more to go into other industries. And so this is why we not only have to change how we do school, we have to change the infrastructure that supports the human capital that's necessary in our schools. We have to change the way we pay teachers. Period, the end. If math and science and technology are priorities for us, well, then that needs to be reflected in pay. And when people have made significant gains in student achievement, we have to recognize and reward that too, because that's how the rest of the world works. We have to be thoughtful about what it takes to retain those people. Those people need to operate in a creative space. Most school districts are the least creative spaces you've ever been in. We don't encourage innovation. We don't allow people to take leadership roles in terms of doing their jobs. And until we're able to change some of those dynamics, we're going to keep on getting the same results. I think we're seeing lots of opportunities all around the country, like the programs that Stephanie mentioned, where business partners are really helping us to rethink what it takes to be successful in these industries. And school districts have to get out of our own way and be willing to operate differently to accommodate these kinds of folks.
Jim, you did some work in these later in life interventions. I mean, 17, 18, it's not that late in life. But these interventions to train people, I don't think you did any work on the ones we've heard about specifically. But what is the outcome that you found?
Well, let me again go back to one theme, which maybe I am an economist. And as an economist, I'm interested in trying to maximize the output of society, to try to maximize the production of human capital, do it in an efficient way, and to look at all the factors in the system, not just the schools, not just the families, not just the workplaces, and but to integrate these together. And I think, especially now, especially in a time when budgets are tight, when public funds are really pressured, we really have to prioritize. We have to ask, where are our investments most effective? So there's a very general situation which we say, okay, economists compute the rate of return. What's the annual rate of return on a dollar invested here and there? What we've come to understand, and I think you're very sympathetic with this point of view, is that there's something which economists call the dynamics of human skill formation. It's just common sense. That when you start young, when children are malleable, you build a base. When the base is strong, the burdens downstream are lessened, the burdens on the school. In fact, you turn things from burdens to opportunities. You kind of make children motivated when they're 3, 4, and 5. They're going to be motivated at age 18. And so I would just urge the panel to think about this question about prioritization. Now, when you come to the interventions at 17, 18, and 19, the news is that there are some very successful interventions, that there are things we can do. Especially for those who are more advantaged. Those who start early on, we get rates of return. If you compute what the return is to another year of school, or even to company training after school, you're getting rates of return that can be as high as 20% per annum. Very high rates of return for the very able and the strongly motivated. Unfortunately, when you start intervening with the very, very disadvantaged, the returns, the programs that we've tried in the past, a lot of public job training programs, haven't been that effective. The good news is that there have been recently developed programs that are tailored, work-based training programs that are recognize the importance of soft skills, that are trying to integrate children, many disadvantaged children, maybe less motivated children, to the world of work, and to teach them those soft skills, to teach them the importance of showing up on time, working with others, and the evaluations on those are very effective. So by the same scrutiny that I would say that the rate of return is very high on early childhood programs, if we're at the stage of 17, 18, and 19-year-old children, and we're saying a lot of these have been very disadvantaged, neglected in the public system in the past, we can still do something. But typically, where the interventions have been the greatest have been in the soft skill dimensions, the motivation issue, the engagement. It's not sort of reading, writing, and arithmetic for the 19 and 20-year-old. It's really getting them plugged into society and understanding their role. So I'm optimistic that we can do something. And this is a kind of creative complement to the kind of work you're talking about in the school system. We can do something, and I think the interventions are showing. Recent successful evaluations of some program called Year Up, the National Guard Challenge Program, and the like, are working with severely disadvantaged people. But I would just sound a refrain. We have the group, we have society as we have it today. But we're in a position, if we're really thinking globally, of what society will look like 20 years from now. And so when we say, if we have a limited pot to spend, and where we want to essentially reduce inequality across all race groups, across all family disadvantage, investing in the family, building that skill base, that has the highest return. That's where the priorities, that's where the evidence shows you can still do something. But it's so much better if you have a good, motivated group of healthy, engaged children to work with. So that's why I would reprioritize, that's all.
I know, and I'll take the professor's point on early childhood and say we've actually pursued a strategy where, in addition to intervening across all of our grade levels, we've put a heavy investment in early childhood education just for that reason. And one of the things we've first made, I think we're the first city that has completely universal pre-K. We have enough slots for every 3- and 4-year-old in the city of Washington, D.C. to be served, which was a radical commitment by our mayor and a number of other people. But we've also piloted a very innovative curriculum called Tools of the Mind. And Tools of the Mind is all about self-regulation. It's about helping children understand how to move and work together. And so if you walk into a Tools of the Mind classroom, you don't see a teacher standing in the front of the classroom. You see a teacher working with a small group of 4 to 5 children. Every kid has a clipboard. They look like mini executives. And on the clipboard, it tells them, either in pictures or in words, what they're supposed to do in what order. And kids literally move from one group to another where they're doing different activities. They are moderating each other. They're engaging completely by themselves because they've been taught to operate in this way. They work in teams. Innovation is prized. And so what we're seeing is huge turnarounds in our early childhood classrooms, especially where disadvantaged children are concerned.
I have a supplementary.
All right, let's be quick. We're almost out of time.
No, but I'm glad you mentioned Tools of the Mind, because it turns out back 40 or 50 years ago, there was a program which has been studied only in a very vague way until recently, called the Perry Preschool Program. If you look closely at what Perry did, it was implementing a version of Tools of the Mind. And so the interesting thing about it is, if you look at and what didn't Perry do? Perry did not raise the IQs of any of the kids. They were all disadvantaged kids. What it did do is it boosted their social skills, their ability to work with each other. One of the biggest effects was reduction in crime, the ability to stay on task, and so forth. So these kids who are in the Perry program, they're 50 years old now. They've been followed their whole lifetime. The Tools of the Mind curriculum, as approximated by Perry some 50 years ago, produces a rate of return that's close to 6 to 10% per annum. That is the estimate. Higher than the return in the stock market in the U.S. between 1945 and 2008. Not recent return. No, but quite seriously, I'm glad you said that, because this is the complement. This will make your life easier. A few years from now, it's not going to be 20 years from now. We're talking a few years from now. Those Tools of the Mind kids are going to be engaged in tasks. They're going to stay. They're not going to be the kids who are held behind. They're not going to be the ones put in special education. They're going to be the kids who go out, try hard, achieve, and will be, I think, the great products, the pride of the DC system. So,
right, so this is whipped by, even though you refused to disagree and have a big fight like I wanted.
I tried to disagree.
All right, yeah. So there are people out here who are thinking about commitments they might make, and I thought with the last 3 minutes we could give them some help. What can they do to help these interventions? Roger, can you at TIAA-CREF hire the 25 million people without high school degrees in America?
We cannot hire them. But let me tell you one of the things we are doing. We have created an internship program in our Charlotte campus. Small numbers at this stage, just 35, 40 people. We had 300 applicants, but it's trying to get to some of the things that Professor Heckman and others are talking about. So we're taking some young interns who know something about computers, but we're really teaching them what it is to come to work every day, to get a paycheck, to have a mentor, so that they're starting to get some sense of the pace of work. And we're focused in often on those who are from disadvantaged backgrounds, or maybe the family isn't showing what all that looks like. So they've been working hard to stay in school. So I think one of the things that we can all think about, for those of us who are running businesses, and Stephanie's doing this as well, is figuring out that partnership that allows people to understand, even at an older age, what it is to go to work every day, to show up on time, to work in teams, et cetera. Building the softer skills. I think that's one of the things that's really important.
That seems scalable. You could do it if you're a small company, a big company.
Absolutely.
Amy?
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, just to sort of conclude with a call to action here, I think, since we are at CGI, I think to sort of wrap this issue around content expertise and STEM and everything else, that we really have to look in a big way to entrepreneurs, to business leaders, to make a huge commitment to not let, educators be alone on an island here. Highly effective, first of all, starting with kids, to begin, and particularly these kids coming from low-income communities who are at risk that we're talking about, bringing people into the classroom to actually understand what success can look like, what your scientists are actually doing at a young age, just makes a huge, huge difference. And one of the big parts of NIFTY's program is bringing thousands of mentors into classrooms and really being the bridge with the business community. And whether they're actually helping with soft skills or specifically trying to figure out how to, to teach a kid how to figure out your return on investment, equally as important. And, I would say that as we think about repositioning education, that the business community has to make a major commitment to literally both invest in resources and human capital to pair this up. And of course at NIFTY we're happy and welcome you at www.nifty.com.
All right, we don't have enough time for that. All right, Stephanie, you've done this. How can they do it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from my company's perspective, the biggest commitment that we can make is to do just what you've said. And we've done it for years. We're building on it every year. And the engagement of our employees back into the schools is an expectation of us. And it was very clear that citizenship in the company is critical, and that giving back to the community is part of your job. And our scientists are back in the classrooms, our financial experts are back in the classroom teaching kids. We work through JA, we work through Big Brothers, Big Sisters to get at some of the earlier childhood support. And in my view, companies need to set this expectation from kids coming right out of school that they're going to get engaged this way.
Great. Well, we're out of time. That was really fabulous. Thank you guys very much. Thank you.